Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro, a slice of news, culture, and conversation. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the program, you've probably heard the saying, small businesses are the backbone of the economy. And that's true, but they're also a lot more.
They're also the backbone of the community. Today, we'll hear about a Cass Corridor mainstay, Temple Bar. But owning an independent business is hard.
A lot don't survive through economic downturns, which many people are bracing for now that the U.S. is in a trade war with our neighbors, Canada and Mexico.
Despite the economic uncertainty, we know one thing: locally owned businesses can only succeed if people shop local.
Yeah, but there are a lot of reasons that people can't or don't, Tia.
Unfortunately, I think of transportation as one barrier.
Absolutely. Costs are another. Convenience.
Convenience.
But it does feel really good to support local businesses.
Yes, it does. And usually the stuff is unique and it's like really, really one of a kind. So,
Yeah. And oftentimes you're also supporting the people making goods too. And that means you know that they're being made ethically and there aren't questions of child labor or other types of labor that...
I know.
So we want to hear from you today. How often do you shop at locally owned businesses? And is it a question of cost, convenience, or something else for you?
We'll hear from some local businesses and we'll take your calls later on. The number is 313-577-1019. But first, in the lead up to the 2024 presidential election, many Trump voters wanted a change to American foreign policy. Over a month into Donald Trump's presidency, that's what they've got. Since Trump has been in power, there have been massive changes to America's stance on the global stage. Trump has halted funding to foreign aid. In the Middle East, his election is at least partially credited with ushering in a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And since being in office, Trump has suggested America take over Gaza and relocate Palestinians. He's also suggested that America take over Greenland, the Panama Canal, and Canada. In that same vein, the administration has changed its orientation toward our historical allies.
Yeah, Tia, that was seen when Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Ukraine and when he chastised European countries for shunning their far-right parties, including a German one that openly waves the Nazi flag. The shift was seen when Trump slapped tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China. Many Arab Americans in Michigan voted for Trump or voted for a third-party candidate to bring about changes to American foreign policy. Many of them wanted America to be tougher on Israel and to get Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire. Over a month and a half into his second term, are people happy with Trump's decisions? Prior to voting for President Trump, Faye Nemer always voted for Democrats. But the CEO of the MENA American Chamber of Commerce and Dearborn resident supported Trump primarily because she thought he would create peace between Israelis and Palestinians. 1.5 months into Trump's presidency, producer Sam Corey spoke with Nemer to get a sense of how she's feeling about the Trump administration now.
Why did you vote for Donald Trump?
There were two messages that resonated very strongly with myself personally and with the larger community. And those entailed his stance on putting America's interests first and foremost. I felt like that was lacking for a very long time. And then in addition to that, so that covered, the domestic and economic policy, but additive to that, foreign policy was equally as important in terms of his narrative and his rhetoric on achieving long-lasting peace in the Middle East. I felt the outreach was genuine and that he was sincere in pursuing a more diplomatic approach to achieving long-lasting peace in the Middle East and other regions, including Ukraine and Russia.
I want to go into putting America's interests first a bit. What does that look like to you? If America has an American first policy and a good one at that, what does that include?
So we typically monitor some of the key indicators from an economic standpoint, and credit card debt had been at an all-time high. So that demonstrates to you that the average American is struggling to make ends meet. They're having to tap into to debt because their disposable and residual income, which is the other indicator, was at an all-time low. And that's disposable income, residual income that you would spend on things that are not basic necessities. So if you want to pursue any type of hobby, if you want to spend on your family, if you want to take a reprieve, you don't have the ability to do so because you're barely covering your basic necessities as an average American. So from a domestic standpoint, we were noticing that there's a strain on the economy. And then we were looking at our national debt that was exceedingly high.
In terms of peace in the Middle East and more peaceful foreign relations, what did you hope the Trump administration would do on that front? You talked about sort of getting out of wars. I know the Biden administration left Afghanistan. It was certainly messy, but they did do that. What were you hoping that the Trump administration would do that the Biden administration didn't?
The Biden administration had 4 opportunities for United Nations resolutions to achieve a ceasefire in Palestine. The ceasefire that was achieved at the very end, utilizing the leverage and political influence of the incoming Trump administration, that was the same ceasefire resolution that was presented in December of 2023, just a month or so after, the October 7th incident. So for us, it was just many opportunities were given under the President Biden administration in order to quell the death toll that we were witnessing of civilian casualties on the ground in Palestine. And then in addition to that, Michigan houses the largest Lebanese American, community outside of Lebanon. And Lebanon was under attack by Israel at the same time that Palestine was under attack. And there was an ongoing occupation of southern Lebanon. That's something that I experienced as a child in Lebanon.
You experienced personally?
Personally, yes. I was in Lebanon until I was 10, and I personally experienced the occupation in southern Lebanon and being displaced. I was a refugee in my own country. I lived in abandoned office buildings in Beirut. So this came full circle for me, to see that southern Lebanon is occupied once again, something that I did not think I would witness in the 21st century, 30, 40 years after the fact. And I feel like we were regressing from a foreign policy standpoint under President Biden.
Is it fair to say that you felt like you lost trust in Democrats, that they hadn't earned your trust any longer?
Absolutely. I felt like the Democratic Party abandoned the Arab American constituents as well as the Muslim American constituents and our allies. Strategically, speaking, I felt like they were, assessing the voting bloc of the Arab American constituents and Muslim American constituents and trying to undermine and circumvent that voting bloc by disregarding our concerns, by alienating that entire voting bloc, and by galvanizing other voting blocs in order to diminish the voting efficacy of this group. They attempted to galvanize the African American vote, which they were successful at. They galvanized the Hispanic vote. They were partially successful there. They tried to galvanize the woman vote, Vice President Harris being the potentially first woman president, and partially successful there. And then the Hispanic, the LGBTQ vote as well. So they were of the understanding and of the mindset that if they're able to make up the difference in other voting blocs, that the Arab American and Muslim American voting bloc would not have the same impact.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm Metro producer Sam Corey speaking with Faye Nemer. She's a resident of Dearborn, and she voted for Trump after being a longtime Democratic voter. We're talking about what she makes of the Trump administration thus far. So I want to go a little deeper into sort of the relations and the ties that Trump has made in the Middle East with a lot of different Middle Eastern countries. What do you make of his plans in Gaza? What do you make of the plan to take over Gaza? What do you make of his positioning towards Israel and towards the Palestinians?
I feel like he could be a lot more even-handed when it comes to his treatment of Palestinians. The proposal that he made was a reincarnation of Jared Kushner's plan, his son-in-law from his first term that was presented in 2017. It was universally condemned then, and now that he presented it most recently, under a different label, it was equally condemned by universal counterparts as well as our strong allies in the MENA region, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, as well as Jordan and Egypt. Jordan went as far as saying they would consider it a declaration of war for the displacement of Palestinians into their region because they deserve to return to their homes. Their homes have been destructed as a result of U.S. financing the weaponry that caused the destruction in Gaza. So they deserve to have all of that rebuilt as well as return to the homes that they know. And I feel like he softened his narrative on that.
Are you surprised? Are you surprised by this? He did signal of his support both for Palestinians and Israelis. He said both things during his campaign. Are you surprised by his actions now?
Well, leading up to the election, he did mention that if Palestinians were in favor of two-state solution, that he would support it. And we feel like, we are optimistic that he'll continue down that path. In terms of shock, in the first 2 weeks of President Trump's administration, he's made some remarks regarding adding Canada as the 51st state or acquiring Greenland, acquiring the Panama Canal. So obviously that sent a lot of shock into a multitude of directions. And
so is it fair to say, Faye, that you're split, that on the one hand you like some of the deal making that he's done in the Middle East, and on the other hand you're upset about some of the things that he's said about what he will do with Gaza?
What I would caution, Sam, is not to use Palestine or Gaza as a bargaining chip, not to use it as a negotiating tactic, because that's effectively his approach to this, is to utilize this proposal as a negotiating tactic in order to bring key stakeholders and key players to the negotiating table. But that's something that we caution against, just understanding the dynamics and complexities of the MENA region and what the Palestinians have endured for over 76 years. The only solution that we have not attempted in the region is a two-state solution, allowing the Palestinians the autonomy to govern themselves, the ability to have a sovereign and a sovereign Palestinian state. That's something that we have not attempted. There's 149 countries that already acknowledge the Palestinian state. I believe under President Trump is the feasibility under which we would recognize the state of Palestine. He is the only president that I foresee having the aptitude to pursue something that is that can be construed as a shock or unprecedented from a U.S. historical standpoint, just to contextualize that. But I believe he's someone that is able to accomplish that for the Palestinians.
I want to talk about the Trump administration more broadly. Trump, of course, has put Elon Musk in charge of firing a lot of government officials. There's also been a lot of freezes or potential freezes on grant funding. That money goes to local and state government agencies. I'm wondering what you make of this. I'm actually just curious how you process this information.
So my background is in the private sector. I've survived through iterations of layoffs where companies, as they're downsizing, they're laying off 5 to 10% of their workforce. We've witnessed this with the big three. We've witnessed it across the spectrum. It's just an indication that government has grown in excess of its function, and he's making a determination as to where that excess is. and whether there's any wasteful spending. I feel like we need to trust the process and wait until the dust settles to understand, kind of the ramifications as well as the impact that'll have.
What is your measurement for whether this goes well or goes poorly in terms of government cuts and government use?
Probably our national debt. We're paying about $3 to $4 billion in interest on our debt on a daily basis. If we're able to reduce that national debt, I feel like that would be a very strong indicator.
Assuming that they want to, what would Democrats need to do to win back your vote? What do you want to see them do now?
Foreign policy is very important. For the Arab American community, we are very closely connected to the MENA region. We have very strong roots there. We have immediate and extended family members. In the most recent situation, my cousin's 6-year-old daughter and his mother were killed in the Israeli attack in southern Lebanon. So it hits close to home. And when you're engaging a counterpart that undermines, those concerns and undermines those priorities, it's very difficult to engage. So I feel like that was one of the most pressing issues for us as a community.
That was producer Sam Corey speaking with Faye Nemer, a Dearborn resident who had never voted for Republican before voting for Trump in November. After Sam and Nemer spoke, Trump shared an AI-generated video which depicted Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sunbathing in Gaza. There were also scenes of Gaza being transformed into a glitzy resort called Trump Gaza. After the video came out, Nemer told NPR that it was offensive and counterproductive to peace talks and that she wanted it to be taken down from the internet. And just yesterday, we learned that the Trump administration has been holding secret, direct talks with Hamas since January. This is a significant change in U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. typically does not negotiate directly with groups it considers foreign terrorist organizations.
From the WDET newsroom, the Great Lakes Water Authority has finished repairing a large pipe that burst in southwest Detroit last month. That burst left many streets frozen and dozens of basements needing repairs. The water damage forced almost 200 families from their homes. The city has been putting residents up at hotels since then. It's also helping affected homeowners with insurance claims. Coming up at 11, some people are using their wallets to show where they stand when it comes to politics and power in the U.S. How often do you shop at local businesses, and what's your reasoning? The number is 313-577-1019. This is the Metro on WDET. Stay with us.